I will ensure that the future of crypto and the future of Bitcoin will be made in the USA, not driven overseas. I will support the right to self-custody to the nation's 50 million crypto holders. I say this with your vote. I will keep Elizabeth Warren and her goons away from your Bitcoin. And I will never allow the creation of a central bank digital currency. I will also
I would love to take our listeners behind the scenes. And if you would give them an inside look at what took place with the campaign, where this idea to orange pill the president, former president, came from. And if you could just give us some insight to what happened going all the way back to last fall and how we got from, a memo sent to President Trump to where we are today.
Yeah, so there have been a lot of very smart voices. And of course, our industry has grown and matured quite a bit. And I'll give a shout out to some of the groups out there. DCG is doing some good polling data. We have Morning Consult and Coinbase have done some good fact finding, and they've discovered, for example, that number of 50 million Americans owning digital assets. And so I can tell you what we've done is we compiled a lot of the publicly available information and we did analysis on it. And we discovered it, and you did, of course, some very helpful work on this. We discovered that there is a meaningful number of voters in swing states who hold these assets who might vote on this issue, on the issues that President Trump just spoke about, that they are terrified of a central bank digital currency because of its surveillance properties and how we could be giving away so much of our personal freedoms, and how sort of un-American it is, and how, there's a reason communist China has really embraced that model. So the freedom to transact, the freedom to custody your own digital assets is becoming more and more of an issue. We did that analysis and figured out that if you go back to the last couple of elections, you're talking about 80,000 voters across 4 states making the difference between who gets elected president and who doesn't. There's a lot more than that. There's millions of voters in each swing state that are holding these assets who might vote on these issues. And there's hardly anybody who's going to vote for a candidate because they oppose Bitcoin. But they might vote for a candidate if they support your right to hold it. And so that's what we found when we were analyzing all the data available. And so we drafted a memo to the president. I gave it to his senior campaign staffer, some friends who are around him, and we published a couple of articles. So, and Sam, you did one, I did one, that explained exactly this point that we're making here, that the data shows clearly there is an outsized benefit politically for a candidate who supports the freedom to transact, the freedom to hold Bitcoin, the freedom to participate in the digital asset market, an outsized upside in terms of potential votes, and virtually no downside. So it is a high reward, low risk strategy to embrace Bitcoin and oppose a central bank digital currency. The data shows people are terrified of a CBDC. They don't want it. They do want the freedom to transact, the freedom to hold Bitcoin. So it was a politically astute strategy. The data showed it. We made sure the Trump campaign was aware of it. We're not the only ones. We can't take credit for this. I know in Trump world, it's always dangerous to take credit. So I don't want to take credit. President Trump had astute political instincts. We gave him information. I think that was going to be helpful. We're not the only ones who did it. There are other very wise people in this space who have been talking to him about these issues. Vivek Ramaswamy, the president, even acknowledged that he's spoken to him about it. He thinks Vivek is smart on these issues. One of the co-founders of Palantir, Joe Lonsdale, I think is smart on these issues, and I think is in communication with the team. Ryan Selkis, of course, at Masari is playing up his connections to the team and his knowledge of these issues. So we are far from the only people trying to discuss these issues with candidates, including President Trump. But I think we did an excellent job at showing why it is not just good policy, and it is good policy. It's also very good politics. And what we saw this week is not just President Trump opposing a CBDC and now wrapping his arms around Bitcoin, really embracing Bitcoin. Now we're seeing the Biden team get scared. And this is a really important point, which, we can get into that. But providing the information on polling data, number of people holding these assets, the number of people specifically who might vote based on these issues, I think we played a small role, hopefully an important role, and we got President Trump to come to the right conclusion on policy and politics. So this is a great, great victory. I think things are trending in our industry's direction generally here in the United States, and that's a great thing.
Absolutely. It seems like the crypto policy bull market is in full swing right now. So much good news coming out of the last week alone. And you made a really good point, Brian. This was very much a collective effort. In the same way that Bitcoin, the asset, is decentralized, so is the Bitcoin community. So this was a lot of work done by people in the crypto policy community to push this forward. And there's one tweet that I think summarizes everything you just said really well. Do you mind pulling that up, Dylan? This is actually, if you could go to the how it started, how it's going. Maybe we don't have it here, but anyways, it's really, you pointed out, Brian, that back in Fortune magazine, you wrote a piece, I think it was back in January, that talked about the Bitcoin playbook that said essentially why embracing Bitcoin is a good political strategy for Trump. And then lo and behold, just a little bit later, we had President Trump endorsing Bitcoin. So that was really remarkable. But this is fascinating too, because it brings up an interesting point. If you could bring up the last graphic, Dylan, about the Elizabeth Warren's anti-crypto army versus Donald Trump's crypto army. It was fascinating because a month ago was the first time President Trump endorsed Bitcoin and crypto in such explicit terms. And there were a lot of people in the industry who were wringing their hands over this, who had so much concern that Donald Trump was making Bitcoin and crypto a partisan issue. I just go back to Elizabeth Warren putting out that campaign announcement that she was forming an anti-crypto army. I think she's the one who was making it a partisan issue. Donald Trump was providing a counterweight. What's most fascinating is, as you just mentioned, Brian, now the Biden camps are starting to get scared. Now there are Democrats who were previously anti-crypto who are either moderating or becoming pro-crypto. So what Donald Trump has done, at least what he appears to have done, is spark a bipartisan crypto renaissance. He's essentially forced a lot of swing state Democrats to moderate on this issue. At least that's how I see it from my viewpoint. But I'm curious to know your thoughts. Am I confusing correlation for causation here? Or was it really Donald Trump who sparked a bipartisan renaissance in crypto policy?
I think it's shades of gray, I think is the real answer. I think every politician wants more votes. And the same analysis that we provided, that we did when we dug through the data, applies not just to President Trump, but it really applies to anybody who wants to get elected these days. There are a lot of voters who care about these issues, who may vote on these issues. And it's not drawn along partisan lines. It's not drawn along demographic lines. It tends to skew younger. A lot of minority men particularly are involved. People, there's a large cohort who are not really politically inclined at all. The ones who are, like I said, it's across partisan lines. It's actually a little bit more Democrat than it is Republican, but it's both. And so anybody who wants to get elected in a contested race would do better to embrace the digital asset ecosystem and harvest those votes, get those people, to support them. And as we've said, hardly anybody is going to vote for someone because they oppose digital assets. That's not really a voting block, but the pro Bitcoin community is extremely gettable in terms of votes. So to answer your question, I do think it's a little bit that, because I think if the Democrats see a cohort that President Trump is getting all the support from, that scares them, and they want to eat into that support. But it's also the data that we just talked about. I think illustrating the point you're making, which is that Trump did scare some Democrats. Congressman Wiley Nickel from North Carolina has been very forward-leaning on these issues. He's a Democrat. And some of his quotes in the press lately have been, we Democrats can't let Republicans have this issue. We can't let them take this issue. And so with Trump coming out and speaking on these, I think that is evidence, anecdotal as it may be, that he scared some Democrats straight on these issues. I want to make another point about timing. Had President Trump come out in favor of Bitcoin much earlier in the cycle, maybe before we had the data that we did, it could have become more of a partisan issue, because there are so many people who just reflexively hate whatever Trump likes. So there was that risk. That risk was real, I believe. And we pointed it out on this podcast. But in the intervening months, all this voter data has come out, shown that it's a solid voting block of people, that it's not partisan, that it's gettable by any politician. And that's, I think, in part why you've seen some of the votes in Congress. So there was a vote to overturn an SEC rule that was very hostile to Bitcoin and crypto. That got 60 votes in the Senate, 12 Democrats, including Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. It got, almost 24 Democrats in the House voting for that. Then when the market structure bill to clearly set rules between the SEC and CFTC in terms of the digital asset market, that was something that a lot of Democrats were not interested in at all. And then this voter data started to come out. We started doing the analysis. We started to make the case that it's good for politicians to be friendly to this market. And all of a sudden, over 70 Democrats, 71, I think was the final total, voted for clear rules for digital asset markets. 71 Democrats in the House, including Nancy Pelosi, supported it. So your question was about correlation versus causation. I do think President Trump was part of the cause, because they saw him getting all the votes from this voting block, and they want some. But also the data supports it generally. It's not just President Trump. He's astute. He's got his finger on the pulse. But a lot of politicians are seeing the light, as it were, that they can get votes if they support digital assets.
Yeah, it's really that simple. You also brought up Chuck Schumer, which I think is a really interesting piece of intel. Can you go into how Chuck Schumer seemed to flip on cryptocurrency and the role of super PACs and all of that?
Yeah, really interesting point. So there's over $100 million in a few groups, including one called Fair Shake. Coinbase is a big donor. Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple, is a big donor. Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, has donated 7 figures. They've raised over $100 million, and they've been playing in primaries, finding crypto-friendly Democrats, particularly in contested primaries. That's been a fertile ground for them. They're finding which general elections they want to play in, where they can sway candidates. And involved in some of those operations, I think, are some former Schumer staffers and operatives. And frankly, I think he's been seeing the same numbers we have, which is, again, that there's an electoral benefit to be supportive. There's really no downside, or there's really no upside to being hostile. And if there's one thing Chuck Schumer cares about, probably more than Joe Biden getting reelected, it's his majority remaining intact in the Senate, so that he can remain majority leader instead of becoming minority leader. So he's very sensitive to wedge issues. Like I said, I think he has some of his people involved who are probably speaking to him about these things and telling him, look, it's a loser if you oppose it. It's a winner if you support it. He's also, of course, senator from New York, which has been relatively forward-leaning on these issues. They issued the BIT license a long time ago, which is, they've been trying to institute a regulatory regime in New York, and in fact, trying to protect it from federal overreach, because they want to be viewed as pro-innovation. So he not only has a constituency, he also has the realpolitik that he wants to remain majority leader, and he has some endangered members that he doesn't want to see stepping in it by landing on the anti-crypto army side of things. So he sees both his own state supporting it, and he sees nationwide in competitive races, he sees a benefit to being supportive. So I think that somewhat explains Senator Schumer's involvement here, as well as his operatives being in this space and seeing that data and probably talking to him about it. But it's a bullish sign for the industry. Never thought we'd be saying thank you to Chuck Schumer, but here we are.
Incredibly bullish. And I never thought I'd be saying thank you to Nancy Pelosi, but here we are too. So I actually think those two votes, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi in particular, have massive implications for this space. So the biggest sign that the institutions were capitulating last year was BlackRock filing for a Bitcoin ETF. And I honestly think that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi voting for pro-crypto legislation is a development that's on par with the BlackRock ETF filing in terms of institutional capitulation. I mean, here you have Nancy Pelosi. If you wouldn't mind bringing up the Nancy Pelosi tweet, Brian or Dylan, here you have Nancy Pelosi, the world's greatest equities trader, somebody who knows the stock market better than anybody, signaling with her vote in favor of FIT21 that this is a legitimate asset class and probably that there's money to be made. I would not financial advice from Nancy Pelosi, I'm sure, but the fact that she is saying that this is an asset class that has a future and she's signaling that with her vote in favor of FIT21, I think is an incredibly positive sign for the space that the institutions are here, that they're giving in and they're recognizing Bitcoin is here to stay. It's also really bad news for Elizabeth Warren and her anti-crypto army. I thought I was perhaps premature a couple of weeks ago in saying that the anti-crypto army is disbanding, but I think at this point they are down bad. If you have the entire Democratic establishment essentially rebuking Elizabeth Warren in her political program, then that bodes really poorly for the future of her anti-crypto efforts. I don't think that means that she will continue to, or that she'll stop yelling about these issues and making a scene about them on the Senate floor, but her clout in the Senate and across Congress is definitely diminished after these establishment Dems have come out in favor of FIT21 and other pro-crypto legislation. So, as you said, incredibly bullish news for the space. And shifting gears a little bit, we wanted to talk about, okay, we've talked about Orange Man, Orange Coin. Next up, we're going to talk about Orange Jumpsuit. So President Trump's legal dramas are reaching a crescendo at this point. For those of you who have been following, you might know that there's a court case right now in the state of New York where Donald Trump is being charged with 34 different felony accounts of falsifying business records. And so the implications of if he were found guilty of this supposed crime would be pretty serious, potentially jail time, potentially being put on house arrest, a whole host of bad issues or bad consequences. And if you wouldn't mind playing the clip, Dylan, this is Trump's take on the issue, which as always is pretty humorous.
In listening to the charges from the judge, who's, as you know, very conflicted and corrupt, because of the confliction, very, very corrupt. Mother Teresa could not beat these charges. These charges are rigged. The whole thing is rigged. The whole country's a mess between the borders and fake elections, and you have a trial like this where the judge is so conflicted he can't breathe. He's got to do his job, and it's not for me, that I can tell you. It's a disgrace, and I mean that. Mother Teresa could not beat those charges, but we'll see. We'll see how we do.
There you go. Mother Teresa couldn't beat these charges, and she's always held up as sort of a saint. And if a saint can't beat these charges, it's going to be tough for Donald Trump. I love his repetition. I love his use of the word confliction, which I don't know if that's actually a word, but everyone knows what he means, and it's great. So anyways, very funny back and forth there between Trump and the press. All laughter aside, these are serious issues. And from the outside looking in, I've asked a lot of people who are against Trump, so how would you describe the case against him? What exactly are they trying him for? And no one has been able to give me a clear-cut description of what he's on trial for, which lends to the ambiguity of all of this. So what do you make of this court case against Donald Trump? Is this a legitimate criminal case, or does this look more like a political prosecution to you?
100% political. I've spoken with some former prosecutors, and some of the main thoughts that I've received are, number one, prosecutors' offices have limited resources. They're government officials. They're supposed to be ministers of justice. In other words, they're not supposed to be for or against anyone. They're supposed to be for the principle of justice. And so with that in mind, they should be going after really egregious, dangerous crimes that they can prove, and they can get bad people off the streets. Number one. Number two is, if you're not really sure what the crime is, or whether it's a crime, or whether you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, or any of these things, you probably shouldn't be charging it, because of the things I stated before, that they're supposed to be ministers of justice, and they're supposed to be maximizing the utility of their scarce resources. This is absolutely not that. It is a novel legal theory, basically claiming that falsified business records, labeling something legal expenses, or however it was labeled on the books, saying that that was falsifying records, which then could lead to another crime, and then the jury, the judge's instructions. President Trump was referring to the charges, the jury charges. I think he was referring to the jury instructions, the jury charges. They are bizarre. I mean, I've been reading about those. The judge said that the jury doesn't have to agree on the underlying crime, that they could take their pick of like 3 different crimes, and four of them could agree that he committed this one, and 4 of them could agree that he committed this one, and the other 4 could agree that he committed this other one, and then they could all combine to form a conviction on something that relates to the business records. But that seems really strange, considering the criminal law in this country requires you to prove each element of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. I think presenting juries with a buffet of options strikes me as ripe for appeal. But also, look, there was a check written to Michael Cohen to supposedly pay the non-disclosure agreement to Stormy Daniels, and then also cover some taxes, and then also cover some legal fees, and it was just booked as legal expenses. That sounds pretty reasonable. I'm not sure what evidence is in the case to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump thought that was false, or knew that was a false characterization. It doesn't even seem like a false characterization. Maybe overly general, but not necessarily false. So it's a novel legal theory. I don't think the facts or the law support any kind of criminal conviction in this case. And indeed, my understanding is that there was a prosecutor from this office who quit because he wanted to prosecute Trump, and then wrote a book about why they should have prosecuted Trump when the office declined to do it in the first instance. And then there was a public outcry, and then the DA decided to file the charges, as weak as they are. So all of the atmospherics that I've described, not very eloquently, but I'm trying, all of these atmospherics, and the fact that we are in full-blown campaign season, certainly lead me to believe that he would not be charged in this case if he were not running for president. And when that's the case, it's clear that it's politically driven, and not driven, by the principles that I described a prosecutor is supposed to espouse, the principles of being a minister of justice, using scarce resources for the kind of highest value targets for society, for ensuring a safe and orderly society. And one other sort of set of facts. In Manhattan, they've been reducing felonies to misdemeanors, like 60% of them. So declining to prosecute a lot of violent crimes. Meanwhile, they seem to be trying to elevate a misdemeanor to a felony by characterizing it in a certain way, when typically this kind of business records issue in New York would be just a misdemeanor. So declining to prosecute really violent criminals and thereby making society safe. Meanwhile, trying to lock up somebody for a paperwork crime that doesn't even seem like a crime, it's really hard to see how this isn't political. And again, I think the statement holds true. If he were not running for president, I don't think there's any way this case gets charged. So that alone, I think, should tell you that this is about politics. It's about power, and it's not about the criminal law. So very scary. Very, very scary. I think, and the way the judges handled it, my understanding is really kind of exceptional. He's even refusing to give the jurors written instructions. He's insisting on reading them to them, but they're asking, there's 34 counts in the indictment. It's a long case. They've been listening to testimony for weeks. So you would think that the judge would give them a copy of the instructions, a copy of all the transcripts, and allow them to do their job. But he seems to be trying to make it as difficult as possible, difficult and confusing as possible. And of course, his sustaining and overruling of objections, my understanding, has been incredibly lopsided in favor of the prosecution and against the defense. So it doesn't seem like it's been an even hand either. The case shouldn't have been brought in the first place if the prosecutor were actually a minister of justice. If the judge were being a neutral judge, I think he would have made some very different rulings in this case. I think that if Donald Trump were not running for president, he wouldn't have been charged in the first place. So I don't know. I'm beating this dead horse, but those are my thoughts.
I agree. The timing seems incredibly suspect. As you said, if he weren't running for president right now at this time, would this court case even be an issue? I think not. It sounds like election interference to me. And the party that is against Trump always characterizes themselves as the adults in the room. If these are the adults in the room, they are a vindictive, politically motivated bunch of people that I fear them being in the halls of power. So it seems incredibly disturbing. It seems like a level of politicization of our judiciary that we've yet to see before in the history of the United States. So it's concerning all around. Let's suppose, however, the worst case scenario that Trump is found guilty on one of these charges, where maybe he is even booked in jail or confined to house arrest. Do you see that? And this is a funny question, but do you see that as being bullish or bearish for Trump's prospects in November? Because I honestly could see either one.
I can't believe we're even talking about this. Yeah, it really is frightening that there is a faction, and I don't want to lump all Democrats into this bowl of nuttery, because I don't think all Democrats think that President Trump should be charged with this non-crime. But this group that is bringing this, I believe, are actually helping his chances of getting elected. Because I think normal Americans who are not in their day-to-day lives hyper partisan, I believe, think that this is an abuse of the justice system and that it's sending us down a very bad path. You can look at the polling data today. The news has been dominated for over 3 weeks by this trial. It is Trump in court on criminal charges. That has been the news for weeks. And all the data we have today about polling shows him winning the election, not by less. So in many of these polls, by more than he was prior to the trial. So I think the numbers speak for themselves. And I think President Trump has said that he's one more indictment away from getting elected. There may be some truth in that humor. So I do think it's backfiring. I think normal people see this as an overreach. They see it as dangerous. And it is driving them actually more into the arms of Trump, not less. That's my theory.
Yeah, I am of the same mind. I think a lot of people who are against Donald Trump don't recognize that he is the anti-fragile candidate. By anti-fragile, I mean the more you pummel him, the more you attack him, the more you try to weaken him, the stronger he gets. And with every indictment that they try to bring against him, he just gets stronger and stronger. And as you mentioned, his ability to continue to rise in the polls tracks with how much he's been in the news with these legal dramas. So it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds. Worst case scenario, if he were booked in jail or put on house arrest, I could see him just going wild on social media and getting a lot of news coverage. And I think it would lift the veil off a lot of Americans' eyes, where they'll recognize that maybe these systems of government aren't completely holy and sacrosanct. Maybe there's a lot of politicization that's going on behind the scenes. And so I think what the opposition to Trump doesn't understand is that with all of this lawfare, they are actively delegitimizing themselves. They are proving more and more that there are political motivations behind our supposedly sacred institutions of government. And I believe in our institutions, but I also believe that politics needs to be rooted out of them. So here's to hoping that that can happen with time. So that's sort of a heavier subject. And we never want to end on a heavy subject. We like to always end on a grab bag section that includes sometimes humor throughout the week, sometimes our favorite memes, sometimes ironic tweets. And Brian, I know there's always something that catches your eye. What caught your eye this week?
Yeah, I got two items for the grab bag this week. One is refreshing. The other is, well, makes me sad. It makes me a little sad, but it's still funny. Let's start with the refreshing one, which is that Harvard University released a statement. Dylan, do you have that? Yeah, Harvard University issued a statement. They put in a working group. They have been obviously coming under fire due to anti-Semitism. They're very weak in mishandling of some heckling protesters who were camping on campus and basically being crazy and breaking all the rules, and the university didn't handle it very well. Basically, they issued a statement saying that they are no longer going to be involved or speaking on issues of public concern that are not directly related to their core function as an institution of education. And here we have Paul Graywall from Coinbase. I know the Bitcoin community has mixed feelings about Coinbase, but I think Paul's generally like Coinbase, but some of the Bitcoin maxis think that they're not quite maxi enough. But any disagreements aside, I think Paul makes an excellent point here that Brian Armstrong has been maintaining these neutrality principles for years and trying to keep Coinbase focused on their core mission. Most notably when Black Lives Matter was protesting throughout America, and his position was that Coinbase should remain focused on Coinbase's core issues and not be speaking about all these political issues. I do think corporate America got over their skis quite a bit and were a little bit, I don't know, shaken down, let's say, by some organizations like Black Lives Matter. Amazon gave them millions of dollars. Many other companies gave them millions of dollars. I think the most extreme, ridiculous example was the fruit snack gushers when they tweeted that they stand with their African-American brothers and sisters, and pretty much everybody just slammed them on social media saying, okay, thank you, fruit snacks, like, for your very political, impassioned statement. Focus on your core mission, guys. You know, that should be the message for most institutions. You don't have to speak about everything. You don't have to step outside your lane. There's a minority of cry bullies who want you to say what they want you to say, and they're going to come after you and shame you if you don't say it. Ignore them. Because if you ignore them, they'll go to a weaker target. They'll attack them. They'll convince somebody else to step in it. But the last thing you should do is, for example, I mean, Black Lives Matter is like an anti-corporation. They're anti-capitalism. They would just as soon take the executives of any corporate American company and string them up in the public square. Don't bribe people who hate you and give them millions of dollars. That's crazy. Don't be shamed into this stuff. You got to stand strong, steel your spine, and say, our company's focused on this, and that's where we're going to stay focused. So, you know, way too little too late from Harvard, but at least they finally came around. And I think Paul's point is correct that Brian Armstrong has been way ahead of the curve with his neutrality principles. And I want to commend him for that and give him a little bit of credit. So thank you to those guys. And thank you to Harvard. You're too little, too late, but welcome to the party and focusing on a core mission. The final point or little grab bag item I wanted to talk about is that there's a study about Bitcoiners. And Dylan, you can pull up that tweet. So there is a study about Bitcoiners that basically says, tried to profile who are these people, who likes Bitcoin. It turns out they are extremely financially literate. They are very smart people, and more so than the general population. And so Bitcoin Magazine, our friends over at Bitcoin Magazine, tweeted, skip university, just study Bitcoin. And that got me thinking. If I had invested my law school tuition in Bitcoin back when I was finishing law school, 2010 or so, instead of attending law school, how would that investment have worked out? My education versus just holding Bitcoin. The answer is that I would now, had I, instead of going to law school, taken all of that tuition money and bought Bitcoin and held it, instead of being the lowly peasant that I am today, I would be worth $175 billion. I would be the fourth richest person on planet Earth, right behind Elon Musk, Arnault, and Jeff Bezos. I would be ahead of Mark Zuckerberg. So
that hurts.
It really, really hurts. While I am proud to be in this special cohort of financially literate people who hopefully will help our society become more financially literate and help uplift more people, while I am proud to be a part of that cohort, it is painful to me that I'm so late to the party. So anyway, yeah, I have that to think about for the rest of my life, I guess. And that's the grab bag. So we can all be poor together, poor and happy, but hopefully get rich and happy someday. I don't know what the next Bitcoin investment is, but we missed the boat on that one.
I mean, maybe to a certain extent, it is Bitcoin, right? It's not as early as it was in 2010, surely. But if the Bitcoin thesis plays out and the next step is institutional adoption followed by nation state adoption, then it is still relatively early. And as we've seen since that 2010 time period, the trend generally seems to be up and to the right. And it is an excellent way to preserve savings and possibly hedge against inflation, where you have dollars that continue to be debased by central bank money printing, reckless spending from Congress. By contrast, you have Bitcoin, which you're assured what that monetary policy is. There will only be 21 million ever. And it seems to be a pretty effective way to preserve your wealth over time. So I do the same thing sometimes too. I remember the first time I ever tweeted about Bitcoin was back in 2012. And it was just a funny one-off tweet. And I don't know if I took it that seriously at the time. And then I started to go down the rabbit hole. And once you go down the rabbit hole, it's hard not to take it seriously, because learning about Bitcoin, you learn about economics, you learn about politics, you learn about monetary policy, you learn about human psychology, you learn about memetics. Bitcoin is an all-encompassing black hole that brings in all fields of study in finance, mathematics, human psychology, everything. And that's why there's really
power and energy.
Yeah. And I have yet to meet a single true Bitcoiner who has fallen away from the faith, so to speak. Because once you get it, you get it. And it's hard to see the world the same after that.
Yeah, I've never met anybody who learned more about Bitcoin and then liked it less. People, the more you learn about it, the more you're fascinated by it, interested in it, and you have faith in it. Yeah, it's interesting. Faith is a loaded word to use, but sort of true. And you kind of lose faith, using that word again, in our fiscal and monetary policymakers, who are of course flawed humans. And then here you have a network just based on mathematics and energy, and so seems a lot more reliable when you think about it that way. Anyway, we can go down that rabbit hole forever. But thanks everybody for listening. Follow us. Oh yeah, like and subscribe. Smash those buttons. I always forget to do this earlier in the pod. Follow us on Twitter at MorganSternNJ, at SamLyman33. Like, subscribe, follow, hit us up if you want to chat about anything. We're always available. Thanks for watching.